You're listening to the Authority Podcast on the B Podcast Network. Welcome in, everybody, and thank you once again for being with us for another episode that should be really enlightening, interesting, give you some new ideas to think about and apply to your work. My guest today is Caitlin Drago. Caitlin is a Los Angeles-based actor turned upstate New York-based certified leadership coach, trainer, facilitator, and she works with leaders and teams to help them listen to one another, communicate, and connect using improvisation as a platform for interactive learning. Caitlin has a new book out now called Approaching Improv, Communication and Connection in Business and Beyond, and we are going to talk all about it. Caitlin, welcome to the Authority.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to start with your mission around the work that you do. I think, getting into that, and then we'll talk a little bit more about kind of the cultures that you're working to create. But it's sort of beginning with the end in mind here, and kind of giving listeners a view ahead to what we're working toward in this conversation. But yeah, what's the mission behind the work that you're doing when you're working with organization?
If I really distill it down, it's helping people to learn how to listen to one another. I think that a lot of things could change for the better if folks slowed down and were present with one another and really heard and considered what the other person said. I know that sounds really simple. And there's a lot that goes into it. But to answer your question in the simplest way I can, I'm on that mission to help people to learn how to listen to one another and connect through listening.
And from I guess, a tangible perspective, right? Once you've gone into an organization and you've worked with them and you've kind of gotten them up to speed on your approach using improv and the other techniques that we'll talk about, what does the culture look like that you're wanting to create that hopefully will be the end result of this work?
Yeah, I want to create cultures of empathy, creativity, and trust. Again, starting with how people are communicating and connecting with one another and impacting their relationships and the way that they work as a team, starting at that point.
Excellent. So open-mindedness and active listening are clearly, I think, central to this. And I do believe, like, one of the whenever we're presenting ideas, right, we have to base them around certain core assumptions. And I think one of those in this case is that most people would agree that these are worthy goals, but may not know how to achieve them or how to execute on it. But I do think there's at least people who, either on the surface or if they really search deep into their heart of hearts out there in leadership positions, who may question whether this is objectively the right approach. Should everybody actually be doing this, or is this just one way of doing it? Or because they may, for example, I think part of the listening, the open-mindedness, the improv that we'll talk about, is that there is there's some merit to all ideas, or that our goal should be to incorporate and include new ideas, right? And then others, they may think, well, the default should be no. From your perspective, why would you say, like, this is objectively the right way to go about it? There's a real basis for this, and so let's kind of make the case for that so that we can then start to develop the skill set.
Yeah, and you really hit the nail on the head of what that tendency is of, okay, I like this idea of considering other people's thoughts and considerations, but there's got to be an end point, right? We can't just brainstorm
Right,
all day
right,
long.
right.
And that's not necessarily what we're pointing to. So the first rule in improv is that we always say yes and that means that we actively listen to the idea that's put forth, and then we add on to it with our own idea so that it can be a collaborative conversation. And yes, if you follow that to a T all of the time, things could go, a little bananas.
Right.
At the core of it is being present with the other person and considering what they are saying before you go to the automatic no. We don't have to worry about people saying no to things because that's our default. That's not a skill that we need to work on.
Right.
What we do need to work on is noticing, when am I jumping to no too soon? When am I thinking more about what I'm going to say than really listening to this person? And how can I look for what can work within what they're saying versus what can't work? And it's all of that that opens us up to more ideas and to innovation, and underneath that, to building relationships where there is trust. If I know that every time I come to you, Ross, you're going to say, nope, that's not going to work, and let me tell you all the reasons why, eventually I'm going to stop coming to you with
Right.
any ideas. I don't want to be shot down every time. If I know that I can come to you and you'll at least listen to me and hear me out and maybe play with an idea for a moment with me, then I'm going to come to you with all of my great ideas. And so we're able to both build that relationship, build that trust, and get the most out of the people who we're working with as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and we'll talk a little more about, right, the various fears around improv and an improv approach. But I think one of them is something that you hit on around what is going to be the outcome of, where is this all headed, right? And an improvisational comedy by nature is designed that there's no net underneath it, there's no parameters, it can go in any possible direction, and that's kind of the goal, right? Is to see where does this go now
Well,
in
I'll push back on you a little bit,
Mhm.
because this is why one of the reasons why people are maybe a little put off or scared of
Mhm.
improv is that preconceived notion that there is no net and there are no parameters. When a team goes out on stage without a script to put on a
Sure.
show, the reason that they're able to do that is because of the parameters and because of the net that's put in place. Those parameters are, we are all agreeing that we're going to say yes to each other. We're
Mhm.
going to build on one another's ideas and make this a collaborative process. No one's in charge. We're going to do this all together. And that net is this idea that we're all agreeing to make each other look good. And
Right.
so when I go out on stage, I don't have to worry about saying the brilliant thing, or if I say something off, someone else is going to pick that up and they're going to help make that make sense to move the scene or the story forward. So we go out knowing that no matter what we throw up out there, someone's going to pick that up. And so we do have that bit of a net and parameters to then play within. So
Yeah.
I always
Right.
say, for folks who are rule followers like I am, I've got them covered when we do
Right.
this. There are parameters, there are rules, there are, guideposts and bumpers for us.
Yeah, right. And your net is your team, right?
Mhm.
And but every context includes those things either explicitly, organically, through via agreements.
Mhm.
And I think that some people who maybe have some resistance to this are, and resistance even just to brainstorming, right? Like, and
Mhm.
and to do effective brainstorming, we do want to use these improv techniques so that we can actually try to build on and explore ideas. But that maybe there's a fear, oh, it's just boundless brainstorming, we come up with an ideas that we can't practically implement because they don't fit within budget, we don't have the resources, etc. But one, I do believe that in most cases, those problems naturally solve themselves in a lot of cases. The people in the room understand the environment in which they're working, so they're not likely to throw out a bunch of things that would have no place within that context. But also, it can be a good insight into the future opportunities and future innovation, right? I mean, just to use probably what's not that creative of an example, but it's just coming to mind right now for listeners maybe who are working within schools, right? let's say 10 or let's say 20 years ago. You may have, if you brought a group of educators from different schools and districts together and said, let's kind of brainstorm about what are some of the best ideas that we can try to implement to, to really take student success to the next level, to best prepare them for real world, application of their skills, etc. You may have come up with the idea of, okay, the best way to be able to, individualize instruction and success, is that every student needs to have their own computer, their own device, and we need to be able to provide that. And at that time, you might have said, well, that idea is ridiculous. It's impractical. We don't have the budget. We don't have the funds. We don't, but it leads to setting a goal of saying, okay, we can't do this necessarily today, but if we know that, one, this is where the passion is within our building. This is the idea that we can exist. How transformational this idea would be. We can see how it is clearly in alignment with the goals that we have in our organizational mission, that it does give us some clarity towards something we can work toward. And that's not something to be afraid of. It's not something to necessarily feel stymied by, because sometimes things evolve a lot more quickly than we think. And okay, whether it's in that case, technology evolves really quickly. Oh, all of a sudden, this is really a realistic thing that we could actually do. And because we were thinking ahead to it, we now know what we would do with that idea. Or in other cases, it could be the thing that helps you get out of a downturn or an organizational rut, right? Where there are those ups and downs that happen in business. And if you have to think of a new idea every time you're in a downturn, you're starting from behind versus maybe staying ahead. But, not that that's the day-to-day thing, but that's like a reason to maybe not hold on to that fear of, where is this headed? We're just going to come up with a bunch of ideas that we can't use because it's just, we're just giving everybody, an unstructured environment to come up with whatever.
So to that, I have two comments. The first is that the benefit to coming up with something that can seem completely out there and something that, no, there's no way that we can do this. What you can do in that moment, along with saying, okay, this is a goal that we can set aside for now and give some time to think through how that could happen, so that we've got that in our back pocket if an opportunity arises. The other approach that one could take is to look at the piece of the idea that they can build on right then. What is the piece of that idea that is plausible in this moment? So maybe it's, yeah, we want to provide computers for every student. What I like about that idea is that we are finding a way to bring a personal piece of technology to each child. And then the other person might say, okay, yeah, what I like about that is, and then they can build on something and come up maybe with something that they wouldn't have come up with before on their own if they had gone to the first, most obvious, easy to do idea. There's actually times where you said that sometimes they put pressure on themselves. Okay, we've got to come up with the best idea. What if in those situations you said, we're going to come up with the worst idea? Let's come up with the absolute worst idea. Let's take all of the pressure off of ourselves to come up with the perfect idea right off the bat. And let's think of the thing that's going to get us kicked out of the district,
Right.
and then work backwards from there. So you get yourself way outside of the box and then work back from there. I was working with a group just last week. They were executive MBA students at RIT, and we were working around teamwork and ethics, which was an
Mhm.
interesting subject matter to throw improv into.
Sure.
But they were working on a scenario where there was an ethical dilemma, and I gave them that instruction. What's the worst? And they came up with this idea of, well, you know what, let's just have everyone go to a barbecue and then they'll fall asleep and then we'll figure out what we're going to do in the morning. Terrible idea. what they pulled out of that was the possibility of, okay, maybe what this needs is simply a pause for everyone to think through what we might do moving forward instead of jumping to an assumption or an idea or a solution.
Right. Yeah, and then there's even, in situations which aren't necessarily typically thought of as improv, but maybe it's, you know, sparking collaboration, or maybe
Mhm.
it's even conflict resolution situations where it's like, okay, what's the one thing you can agree with in this other person's idea, or in the way it was framed by our recent guest Hesha Abrams here, what's one thing you don't hate? but basically
That's
saying
great.
like, okay, and in this case, like, we're coming up with ideas that we think they're bad ideas, but then we can investigate them and say, like, there is something to this, or ideas that we intentionally think are not necessarily bad, but impractical, something we can't actually achieve. But then we can kind of look for what are the component parts that we maybe could do, or could try, or could explore. And then do we feel like, if we're doing a small part of a big bold idea, toward our big dreams, that we actually can see ourselves making progress toward our goals in a way that we might not if we were only thinking small because we felt like we only had small opportunities or small resources, right? So you
In
talked about, yeah, go
in
ahead.
in those conflict situations, if you use that tool of, okay, here's the thing that I don't hate, the base of that starts with actually having to listen to the
Mhm.
argument of the other person
Right.
fully so that you can find the thing that you don't hate. And I know we're using the word hate, but it's that it's the positive inquiry and looking for what can work versus what can work and you can't work. And you can't do that
Right.
unless you are actually listening to the whole entire thing that the other person says. When I work with groups and apply, the improv approach to situations where there is a difficult conversation, or maybe we're giving and receiving
Mm,
feedback, or they're, solving a problem together in some capacity, oftentimes we skip over the whole finger pointing stage
mm.
because we are looking for what can work and we're jumping right to creative problem solving versus spending that time figuring out whose fault it was.
Yeah, and yeah, I think it illustrates a variety of things. One is, in that case, if we're talking, conflict resolution, the context is understanding that we need to we need to determine a solution one way or another. Now, either it's entirely in favor of one party or the other, or it's a compromise. That's something, though, that can be applied to other situations, to creating an organizational culture and saying, okay, a solution means that, a culture should be representative of the individuals who are part of that workplace. So just having it be a top down approach where one person decides what it is and everybody just has to do that thing is unlikely to come into a thriving, living, evolving culture, right? So it's a solution is we need to have different inputs and come to ideas that different people can get on board with, that nobody's totally opposed to, that sort of is representative of the individuals we have here. I also think that there's something about aggregating the idea from the individual, and that working in both directions. One of those things being, if it's somebody that you really don't don't feel like you get along with, right, that you don't want to just discount any idea that person might have because you have a personal distaste for them or antipathy.
Mhm.
Clearly that's present in a mediation or an arbitration, a conflict, where you're antagonistic parties, but you need to try to see some path forward. I also think it happens in the other direction, where you want to be able to disaggregate the merit of an idea from somebody that you really do like. and who maybe is charismatic and influential, and say, well, we can't just go along with everything this person says just because we like them, because we need
Mhm.
to be able to investigate their ideas, and investigate their ideas on equal ground to this other person's idea who doesn't have those same personal characteristics. And if I'm the person who ultimately, maybe I'm the manager or the, whatever, but I'm the ultimate decision maker, I need to create an environment where we actually can do that.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we're not really making decisions based on the quality of the ideas, the opportunities, things that might be best for the company, but it's who's the best at making us feel like we like their idea. And those are skills for individuals to develop. But
Mhm.
still, right, I think it is, there's something to be said for kind of being able to really focus in on, okay, what are the things that I like about what they're saying, and that would apply equally regardless of who's saying it.
Exactly. And when it comes to the yes and framework at its core, it creates that even playing field so that it's not just the loudest person who's being heard. It forces us to have a collaborative conversation where two people are contributing equally to an idea. So much so that hopefully at the end, we don't even know who the idea
Right, right.
came from. It's all been woven together. And again, you're talking about having these difficult conversations and trying to separate the person from the idea or the person from the situation. And at the end of the day, how can we make these conversations ones that foster connection as well,
Mhm.
so that moving forward, even if it is a tough conversation, that the relationship has been improved and that we've built trust. There was a Just yesterday, I was working with a team of leaders at a school district, and we were talking about giving and receiving feedback. And afterwards, I got a really nice note from one of the participants saying, I had this tough meeting that I was really dreading, and it was still a hard conversation to have. But with what we had talked about, we were able to leave that conversation having built connection at the end of it.
Yeah. Is that another of the fears that people may have? Is, do they feel like approaching everything from the yes and perspective in business is, maybe feels inauthentic to some people? Like, there's some people who just have a really hard time saying yes or smiling at
Hmm.
ideas that they really feel like they don't like. And maybe not, right, right, not being able to zoom out and seeing how, one, just having an open mind toward ideas and considering them doesn't mean you have to ultimately do them, but it does increase your influence and the positive perception of you. People feel good about interacting with you and bringing you ideas
Hmm.
because they get a positive reception.
Yes, that is one of the fears. Well, I
Yeah.
can't say yes to everything. That doesn't make any sense. And the I call it the yes and mindset, and then that plus the idea of making each other look good equals the improv
Mhm.
approach. So this yes and mindset, I shift it from a rule to a mindset, because it when I work with teams, absolutely, we practice this to an absolute extreme, and I hold them really close to that rule so that they can practice it to an extreme and then scale it back in a way that feels authentic to them when they go back to work. So maybe what they take from it is, all right, I'm just going to try to be more present. It doesn't mean that I have to smile and say yes to every idea. I'm just going to focus on being more present with the people I'm in front of. Or maybe they're going to try to shift their focus to, okay, I know my tendency is to say no. Let me see if there's something that I can find, like a little sliver of what I like in this. Or maybe it is a simple language shift from saying
Mhm.
but to and, which often can you can say the same message without being facetious or making empty promises. And at the same time, with that simple language shift, like you said, it leaves that person feeling completely different when they walk out of that room. So if I were to say, hey Ross, I've been working really hard. I want a raise. And you say,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you want a raise. You've been working really hard, but I'm going to have to go check with financing. I'm going to walk away thinking, oh, he's probably not going to do anything about that. And I'm going to
Yeah.
bring that energy to the rest of my day.
Right.
And but if you were to instead say, yeah, you've been working really hard and you think you deserve a raise, and I'm going to go check with finance on that first.
Right.
You have not made any promises that you can't keep. And at the same time, I'm going to walk away feeling like I was actually heard and that maybe you're actually going to go and do something
Mm-hmm.
about a question that it probably took a lot of guts for me to
Right.
come and
Right.
approach you with. And it's a simple, simple language shift of just taking your butt and turning it into an and.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way of being able to show somebody else that their glass is half full versus half empty. You're partially right instead of partially wrong. I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking of that, particularly in relation to teachers and students, right?
Yeah.
And how we can encourage, continued progress toward mastery of an idea or concept by just simply paying attention to our language. You put out a question, a student raises their hand, they, again, right, they do that thing that takes some courage to answer, and their answers, some percentage correct, anywhere from 1% to 90%,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's an example, say, yes, this I can, and point out whatever is in there, and then encourage further thought, further exploration, discussion,
Mm-hmm.
but something that says, you're on the right track, basically, versus yes, but, again, which is like, well, you're right a little bit, but you're wrong about this other stuff, or even no. I mean, it could be a replacement for something that otherwise would be no, that's not right. And it's an opportunity to say, okay, what are all the things happening here that I can acknowledge and reward and recognize, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if the thing that you said kind of feels totally wrong, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you took the step to say it. You gave it a shot, right? Like, there's some way, and again, that's just more encouraging, and it does seem like so much of the value and the ultimate efficacy of this approach is as simple as paying attention to language
Mm-hmm.
and paying attention to the way that we respond to people and the words we use, regardless of what they said in the first place.
Yeah. And if you think about it too, it's about helping to keep the learning brain online.
Mm-hmm.
When we are, it doesn't have to be, this isn't a positive, or what is it, toxic positivity situation.
Mm-hmm.
We're not encouraging that. It's, where are the opportunities, when I have the option to say no and that person feels shut down, they might go into that fight or flight mode where their brain is no longer in that creative problem solving learning mode. Where do I have a choice to do that versus saying yes or looking for what can work to keep that creative and positive part of our brain online, so that person
Mm-hmm.
can continue to learn, that they can hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I learned, or I observed the funny version of this in with my son, who's now 3, but even when he was a
I've
little
got one of
younger,
those.
he would he would try things, and sometimes it didn't work out the way he wanted. And if somebody would say good job to him, he would say not good job, like, because he knew it didn't work out. But
Mhm,
if you say good try, that was encouraging. And I was like, yeah, say good try, because he knows the difference between what he's
mhm.
trying to do and not. So if you if you patronize him, he's gonna get mad.
Yeah.
But if you just tell him good try, let's try again, he, okay, let's try. Yeah, but I found it pretty fun. Are there like other common like communication mistakes around this other than kind of, failing to use the right words, other ways in which communication can be the impediment?
Oh my gosh, communication can be the impediment so often. And it can be, I say a simple fix. It's not simple because people are complicated.
Hmm.
And so often folks just want to know that they have been heard. If somebody comes to you in a state of conflict, something's wrong, they're feeling anxious about something.
Hmm.
One of the ways to help them to calm down and get grounded and be in a space where they can then have a collaborative problem solving conversation with you is to first listen to them and let them know that they've been heard, whether that's, reflecting back what you heard, just being with them. That's going to help bring them to a place where they can then have a more productive conversation with you. So often, sometimes we jump right to problem solving when it's like, no, this person needs to know that they've been heard first,
Right.
and then we can move forward. And one of the other common misconceptions that you've touched on a couple of times is, oh, improv can be really intimidating. And what I love about improv is that it is something that we are doing all day, every day.
Hmm.
So when I work with a team or suggest this to somebody, it's not a completely new thing that's happening. They, no one gave them a script in the morning. We're all just doing our best in dealing with whatever has been thrown at us. This is just another tool to add to their tool belt so that they can have more productive conversations and to foster better relationships through those conversations.
Right. And exactly in that way, improv is reflective of a strong culture, right? It's a teamwork, um it's a team approach in which everybody on that team is bought into and in agreement on what the culture is. So I think that's where some of that fear comes from, is, oh, if it kind of comes to me and I blank and I can't come up with
Uh-huh.
anything, I'm gonna fall flat. But but you're not alone. It's
Right.
you're there, you're picking each other up. Same thing that should be happening um in any other kind of environment, whether it's a sports team, an office, a school, whatever, to say, okay, are we paying attention and tuned in enough to each other, and we can tell when those moments are where it's my turn to jump in and help my teammate out and come in and just keep things moving forward, versus
Yeah.
saying everybody's standing around and looking
Uh-huh.
at, oh, this,
Yeah. And
you see,
there's
yeah.
the other side of that coin of when can I jump in and help out is when can I step back so
Hmm.
that somebody else can take the spotlight. So often we try to take everything on ourselves when there's likely somebody close by who that might be something that they're really interested in
Hmm.
trying, or maybe it is a hidden skill that they have that we just don't know about. So it's also about understanding what the other people around you are passionate about and what are they really good at, so that when that opportunity comes, you can give them that option to step up and really shine in that moment. And whatever position you hold, whether it is a leader or a teammate, you step back and make space for that person to step up and really look incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think so much of particularly what you might observe in a functioning versus non-functioning basketball team, where there's a difference between a flow of teamwork and collaboration, where it just, right, it's kind of like an organism, and things naturally shift toward whoever has the advantage at a given time, the better
Hmm.
matchup or the hot hand or whatever, versus times where the teams are struggling where the whole is less than the sum of its parts, because there's like forced turn taking. Okay, now
Mhm.
it's this guy's turn to have a possession and take a shot. Now it's the other guy, and they're not, nobody's really adapting to the situation and the context, and it really is the difference between overachieving and underachieving, right? and
Mhm.
and what is the broader outcome. And so much of that just comes from its mentality, its practice. It's really, all those reps. How many hours does, an improv troupe, uh, right, practice
Yeah.
versus the time when they're on stage,
And
and
it's
getting used to knowing, I know exactly what's going to happen, or I know where this person's going to go and take it, because we've gone through it so many times, and we're tuned into, we have that empathy and that perspective on, okay, I know how they think and they know how I think, and we have that comfort level.
exactly. Yeah, it's really knowing that whole person that you're working with.
um I don't want to, I mean, we've talked a lot about, of course, yes and the number one rule, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to highlight if there's other, improv principles that explicitly, should be highlighted, that we should be bringing to the workplace.
Yeah, I guess I would just underline that idea of making each other look good. They both really go hand in hand. I'm going to throw something out there. I know you're going to say yes to it. And also, if something weird happens, we're all, you're not going to point at me and laugh. we're all
Mhm.
we're all here to really make each other shine, knowing that if we all do that for one another, we all end up looking really incredible in the
Excellent.
end.
um so for the leaders listening, how do they go about getting their teams to buy into that? And I think in particular, two of the things that we should highlight as potential impediments. One, we've talked a lot about the fear, right? The fear of the
Mhm.
approach. And the other thing that you mentioned is, if it's done right, by the time it's concluded and we've come out with an end product, it's essentially nearly impossible to assign individual credit, right? Because
Mhm.
it was such a collaboration, that wherever that idea started or evolved, it comes out as a product of the team, which in some organizations and for some individuals in those organizations may not appeal to them because they need, I mean, they may realistically, in order to get where they want to go, need to figure out, how do I gain credit? But I guess, how does a leader within their culture they're create an environment where this approach will take hold?
You know, if it's one person who's trying to implement this change and this approach, I always say it always starts with modeling
Mm.
modeling that behavior first. If the benefit of having a team do it together is we're all learning this at once. And so people can buy in all together. But if you have one person, say, who's read the book and they say, great, I want to bring this in, that's where you start. You start with saying yes, and maybe in a meeting you put some of those rules into place. Maybe you build it into the expectations for that meeting or for those conversations of, we are going to say yes and to each other for the next 5 minutes, or we're outlawing the word but in here. I have these yield signs that I'll hand out often that say yes and on
Mm-hmm.
them, and those can act as those visual reminders that I'm going to slow down, I'm going to let somebody else go first, and I'm going to keep that yes and principle front of mind. So that can be something that is up. So it's that combination of modeling it
Mm-hmm.
themselves and then finding little places where they can integrate that into the expectation for how people are to communicate and connect with one another.
Excellent. And what about from the employee perspective? Let's say the individual who is not in charge of the organization or the team necessarily, and who may want to kind of tap into some of the principles of this approach to make their ideas heard, right? Or to gain more influence, even if they may be the only one doing it. How might they go
Mm.
about that?
Yeah, there was, so through the writing of this book, there was a study that I read about that was basically a what it was was that they found that when other people amplify the ideas of others, it not only helps that other person's idea to be heard and considered as more with, having more clout, it also helps with the credibility of the person who has amplified that other
Mm.
person's idea, which brings us back to modeling the behavior themselves. When they start to bring that yes and into conversations, when they start to try to make other people look good, that's the best place to start. I know that
Yeah.
sounds simple, but that's and that's what I have for
Right.
that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are a variety of intangibles in addition to the things that are a little more tangible, right? And on the one
Hmm.
hand, when we have an entire culture built around the approach, we could come up with better ideas, more refined ideas, have fewer missed missed ideas, right?
Uh-huh.
Fewer missed opportunities because things get brought to the table and considered and all that. On the other hand, there's also there's intangibles around influence and perspective and how we relate to and perceive one another, and people certainly do have a more positive perception of those who champion one another's work. And again, like, it doesn't it be being considerate of ideas and exploring them, or treating the fact that somebody had them respectfully is not inauthentic. If even if you are like,
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what this idea is all about, because
Well, and in that amplification, there's an opportunity there to build on that idea and make that idea even better. So it can be, hey, Cheryl, I just heard Cheryl just said X, Y, and Z. I think that's a great idea. And ba, 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 ba. So it can be a both and kind of situation.
right, yeah, I mean, there's humility I could be the only person who doesn't get it. Everybody else might say, wow, that's great. Or it could, again, I mean, it could encourage the next idea, right? This
Hmm.
one, for whatever reason, this one's not going to work, not going to go anywhere, but this person feels encouraged to now come up with their next one because that one, found somewhat of a receptive audience and some amplification and discussion, which are all good things as we're dealing with, again, to tie it back to students and colleagues and coworkers and all these different audiences who it's there's relationships involved, there's long-term goals involved, and we want to encourage people to share, to think out loud, to work things through where they don't have the final answer yet, right? And to
Hmm.
seek support and collaboration. So these are all positives. Is there any final thing either that I haven't asked you about, or any final point you'd like to distill for listeners to take away from the conversation?
I think it would be more of a challenge to go out today and start with either being present, looking for something that you can say yes to, or simply starting with noticing when you're saying but, and then try to shift it to and.
Yeah. Yeah, start small. And
Hmm.
just even just being mindful of that, you may realize that you're doing this more than you thought you were, and you may see results by trying the opposite. Listeners, you can find the book Approaching Improv on Amazon. You can also learn more at Caitlin's website, inspireimprov.com. We'll put the link to that below, where you can go directly and learn more about that. Anything else listeners should check out?
That's it for now.
Cool. Yeah. Well, there's a lot more in the book. We've really only have scratched the surface there. So, if you're thinking about your organizational goals, your organizational culture, things you'd like to see improved, done differently, or just ways to kind of surface, right, bigger, better ideas, and to maintain, I think, consistent progress, right, and avoid nation, or avoid the opportunity cost of missed ideas. There's a lot here, so check those out at the links below. Also, please do subscribe to The Authority for more author interviews coming every single week. We'll continue to cover a variety of topics that we believe will benefit you in your roles. And visit bpodcast.network to learn about all of our shows. Caitlin, thanks again for being here.
Thanks for having me.